On August 15, 1977, a radio telescope in Ohio detected the most powerful narrowband signal ever recorded from deep space. For 72 seconds, something out there was screaming at us, using the precise frequency hydrogen atoms use to communicate across the galaxy. The astronomer who found it was so shocked, he circled the data on the printout and wrote one word in red ink: wow. For decades, it was the holy grail of radio astronomy, the one signal that refused to explain itself. No satellite, no reflection, no repeat. Just one impossible blip from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, never heard again. Or so we thought. Because this week, Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb, yes, the same man who argued Oumuamua might have been alien technology, went on record saying there's a 99% chance the 1977 WOW signal didn't come from empty space. It came from the same trajectory that 3I Atlas is following right now. The coincidence is almost too neat. The signal came from the right sky coordinates, the right distance, and the right motion vector. 4 decades before this interstellar object even entered our solar system. If he's right, that means the universe didn't just whisper to us once. It sent us a message, and the messenger has finally arrived. Less than 2 weeks from today, 3I Atlas will emerge from behind the sun, after months of radio silence. If it emits even a single pulse on that same hydrogen line, 1420 megahertz, everything we know about the WOW signal, about cosmic communication, about ourselves, changes forever. Hit that like button, subscribe if you want to follow this as it unfolds in real time, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Because what happens when 3I Atlas comes back into view might be the answer to a message we never realized we'd already received. Chapter 1. The Rediscovery of the WOW Signal. October 18th, 2025. It has been 48 years since that strange moment in Ohio, and now for the first time the coordinates of the WOW signal and the trajectory of an interstellar object have aligned so precisely that even the skeptics are running out of explanations. It started quietly. No headlines. Just a short note published on Avi Loeb's research blog at 5 in the morning. The title read, Temporal Coincidence Between 3I Atlas and the 1977 Signal. 2,000 words, 1 graph, and a conclusion that stunned the astronomy community. Loeb wrote that, based on updated ephemeris data from the European Space Agency, the path of 3I Atlas, our third confirmed interstellar visitor, crosses a narrow patch of sky that perfectly overlaps the original right ascension of the WOW signal. The statistical probability, he wrote, is less than 1% that this alignment is random. Within hours, that paragraph was circulating everywhere. Reddit threads, astronomy forums, and X posts exploded with screenshots of the map overlay. The first caption that went viral was simple. It was calling us before it arrived. By noon, the story had escaped the science blogs and jumped into mainstream media. NBC ran a headline, Harvard astrophysicist suggests interstellar object linked to 1977 signal. CNN followed, calling it a wild but testable idea. NASA said nothing. SETI said nothing. The silence was deafening. What makes this story so gripping isn't just the claim itself. It's the math behind it. Loeb's team reconstructed the inbound trajectory of 3I Atlas using a combination of data from ESA's Gaia satellite, the James Webb Space Telescope, and ground-based radar arrays in Chile and Hawaii. The object's vector, when projected backward through time, intersects with the exact declination where the Big Ear telescope recorded the WOW signal nearly half a century ago. Not near it, not in the same quadrant, exactly on it. To the average listener, that might sound like coincidence, but to radio astronomers, it's the equivalent of rolling a million-sided die and getting the same number twice, 48 years apart. What makes it even stranger is the frequency itself. The WOW signal was detected at 1420 megahertz, the natural emission frequency of neutral hydrogen, the building block of every star, planet, and life form in the galaxy. It's the universal hailing channel, the one frequency every civilization capable of building a radio would understand. Loeb's argument was simple, almost too simple. If you were sending a message across the stars, you'd use the hydrogen line. And if that message was followed, decades later, by an object traveling along the same vector, what conclusion do you draw? He called it a cosmic breadcrumb trail. Others called it career suicide. By the next day, podcasts, YouTube channels, and late-night shows were dissecting his words. 99% chance was the soundbite that stuck. It wasn't even in his paper. It came from an offhand remark during an interview with a Boston radio host. When the host asked, "So, what are the odds this thing is connected to the 1977 signal?" Loeb paused and said, half joking, half serious, "If you asked me last year, I'd say 1 in 10,000. Now, 99%. That one line turned an obscure academic post into a cultural firestorm. Within 24 hours, the term "wow signal redux" was trending globally. Videos claiming to decode hidden data bursts from 3i Atlas flooded the internet. Amateur radio operators aimed their antennas towards Sagittarius, hoping to catch something NASA might be ignoring. Some streamed live, watching static on their screens like it was a countdown to revelation. But here's what made the story explode. Someone found an anomaly. A data analyst named Caroline Reeves, who works with the citizen science project SETI Home, published a thread showing that on October 16th, just 2 days before Loeb's blog post, a faint narrowband spike was detected at 1420.4 MHz by a private observatory in New Mexico. Duration, 71 seconds. Strength, nearly identical to the original WOW signal. When she overlaid the detection coordinates on Loeb's 3i Atlas trajectory map, the match was almost exact. That's when people stopped laughing. SETI quickly issued a statement calling the detection likely terrestrial interference. The explanation didn't hold. The observatory that picked it up is located 50 miles from any major transmitter. The frequency was pure, unmodulated, no drift, no reflection, no Doppler artifacts. So what do you do when 48 years after a mysterious signal screams through the sky, you detect the same frequency from the same direction within 48 hours of an interstellar object passing that exact line of sight? You ask questions, big ones. Here's where the story takes a darker turn. The same day Reeves published her data, the observatory's feed went offline. Its Twitter account vanished. Its domain returned a server under maintenance message. When asked for comment, the director of the facility said they were performing scheduled upgrades. No further details. NASA was contacted for verification. Silence. ESA declined comment. The Very Large Array in New Mexico, the same network that could easily confirm or deny the detection, suddenly went into limited operations mode due to budgetary realignment. And so the internet did what the internet always does. It filled the silence. Some said the WOW signal had never stopped, that it had been repeating faintly for decades, buried in the noise, waiting for us to notice. Others claimed 3i Atlas was responding, that its strange brightening patterns near perihelion were a form of optical encoding. A few even suggested the signal was never meant for us at all, that we were eavesdropping on someone else's conversation. Avi Loeb himself remained calm. In his next interview, he smiled and said, "Science is about connecting dots. Sometimes those dots are 48 years apart." By the end of that week, a new countdown had begun. Astronomers predicted that as 3i Atlas moved out from behind the sun, sometime in early November, it would pass through the same region of sky from which the WOW signal originated. If the object emitted even a whisper of energy on that frequency again, it would be the most important scientific event of the century. And yet official agencies had gone completely silent. For the first time since the original 1977 event, the world was united not by discovery, but by waiting. In the comments section of Loeb's blog, one post stood out. It read, "The universe doesn't repeat itself by accident." Chapter 2. The Evidence Nobody Released. October 19th, 2025. Less than 24 hours after Avi Loeb's post shook the internet, a handful of astronomers began asking the same question. If the connection is real, where's the data? Because here's the thing, there should be plenty. NASA, ESA, and several university observatories have been tracking 3I Atlas for months. Dozens of high-resolution instruments, from the James Webb Space Telescope to the Deep Space Network, have recorded terabytes of information. Yet when reporters started requesting radio data specifically around the hydrogen line, 1420 megahertz, something strange happened. They were told it doesn't exist. The official explanation: the instruments weren't configured to monitor that band. That might sound plausible until you realize the hydrogen line is the single most observed frequency in all of astronomy. Every radio telescope on Earth, even the small backyard ones, keeps it running as standard. It's how astronomers map neutral hydrogen clouds across the galaxy. Turning it off would be like asking a doctor to examine you while refusing to look at your heartbeat. So why did NASA claim their receivers weren't listening? That question hit a nerve. Within hours, amateur radio astronomers began publishing screenshots of their own data logs, showing that their small backyard dishes were listening, and some had even recorded faint activity near the predicted coordinates of 3I Atlas. Then came the deletion. A Reddit user called Deep Range Observer noticed that NASA's online radio data portal, a public archive containing decades of raw telescope output, had quietly removed the entire month of August 1977. The same month the original WOW signal was detected. At first, people assumed it was a glitch, maintenance, database migration. But the timing was too sharp. The removal occurred less than 6 hours after Avi Loeb's paper went viral. And when users tried to access backup mirrors through the Internet Archive, they found something even more unsettling. Those backups had been overwritten the same day. It was as if someone had decided that all traces of the original WOW signal's context, its noise environment, the background calibration files, the full spectrum recordings, needed to vanish. By the next morning, journalists started making calls. NASA's official statement was bland and bureaucratic. Due to ongoing system modernization, some legacy datasets are temporarily unavailable. Temporarily, but when pressed for a restoration date, no one could give one. ESA gave the same answer. The Very Large Array in New Mexico said their archival system was under review. The Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics simply refused to comment, and that's when someone leaked the emails. An anonymous message was sent to several reporters, including one from The Atlantic, containing what appeared to be internal correspondence between project managers at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. The subject line: hydrogen line suppression. In one message, a systems engineer warns that archived data may appear to show narrowband artifacts consistent with terrestrial interference. Another reply, dated just hours before the shutdown, reads, "Recommend temporary removal until review completed." The timestamp was October 17th. That's 2 days before Loeb's post. So either NASA had been planning this cleanup before the news broke, or they knew exactly what was about to surface. Meanwhile, Avi Loeb doubled down. He gave an interview to Scientific American saying, "If we see patterns being hidden instead of examined, it tells us the pattern is real." He wasn't accusing anyone directly, but his tone said everything. In the following days, several independent researchers tried to replicate his analysis. Using open-source orbital data, they confirmed that 3I Atlas's inbound trajectory did, in fact, cross the sky region from which the WOW signal originated. Even conservative models, assuming small deviations, still placed it within 1 degree of that point. That's close enough to matter. But without the full historical dataset, verifying the frequency match is impossible. The only remaining copy of the original WOW signal recording, a faint printout on thermal paper, sits in a museum archive in Ohio. Everything else, the analog tapes, the calibration logs, the full 1420 spectrum, are missing. And yet, one more clue slipped through the cracks. A private contractor working with the Deep Space Network, who spoke under condition of anonymity, shared a photograph of a diagnostic screen taken during a recent system test. On it was a faint repeating line of numbers: 1420 455 MHz, 71s, 1805 UTC. When compared to the 1977 WOW signal, the match was eerie. Same duration, same offset, same time of day, down to the minute. He said the reading wasn't supposed to appear. It was a test of the tracking array's power calibration. but the number kept returning, like an echo. When he reported it, his supervisor told him to flush the buffer and move on. By now, you can guess what happened next. The leak spread online, screenshots everywhere. Analysts debated whether it was real or fabricated. NASA declined to verify it, citing security reasons. The story was buried under a dozen fact-check headlines calling it unsubstantiated. But something else was quietly happening in the background. 2 amateur observatories in Europe, one in Belgium, another in Poland, detected faint modulations in the hydrogen band within hours of each other. They weren't identical, but both showed an unusual periodic drop in amplitude every 72 seconds, the same duration as the original wow signal. That's not random noise. That's a clock. And it raises a terrifying question. If this is a signal, who is timing it? And why now, after 48 years of silence? In one of his lectures last week, Avi Loeb said something that keeps replaying in my head. He said, "The universe doesn't hide, people do." He's right. Because every time we've gotten close to the truth about 3I Atlas, something gets deleted, shut down, or conveniently under review. And if that sounds familiar, it should. That's exactly how the 1977 story ended, in silence. But this time, maybe not, because the object responsible for that silence is about to come out from behind the sun. And every radio telescope on Earth, official or otherwise, will be listening. Chapter 3. The Hydrogen Line Mystery. October 20th, 2025. Every major observatory on Earth is now pointing its dishes toward one frequency, 1420 megahertz, the cosmic heartbeat of hydrogen. If you've never heard of the hydrogen line, here's the short version. It's the simplest, purest signal the universe makes. When a hydrogen atom's electron flips its spin, it emits a photon at exactly 1420.405 megahertz. That wavelength, 21 centimeters, cuts through dust, gas, and light years of silence. It's how astronomers map the Milky Way. It's also the frequency that every extraterrestrial intelligence search focuses on. Because if you were trying to get someone's attention, that's the one frequency guaranteed to say, "We understand physics." That's why the wow signal in 1977 was so shocking. It came from that exact frequency. It lasted 72 seconds. And it looked exactly like what you'd expect if someone, or something, had sent us a deliberate beacon. Now, nearly half a century later, that same frequency is whispering again. The first to notice was the Max Planck Institute in Germany. Their Effelsberg radio telescope, one of the largest in Europe, detected faint intermittent bursts near 1420.46 megahertz, a slight offset, just enough to suggest Doppler drift from a moving object. The pattern repeated every few hours. When plotted, the peaks formed a curve that matched the orbital velocity of 3I Atlas as it slingshot around the sun. That's not coincidence. That's physics. The bursts weren't strong, maybe 1 part in 100,000 above background noise, but they were consistent, too consistent to ignore. Within a day, independent verification came from Japan's Yasuda Deep Space Center. Same frequency, same drift, same periodicity. The data pointed to one conclusion. The source was moving exactly like 3I Atlas. NASA stayed silent. Again. For a few days, the story hovered between fascination and disbelief. Some experts suggested the signal was natural, solar reflection, a quirk of hydrogen clouds, maybe even a calibration error. But Loeb's team didn't buy it. They ran the numbers. If it were a reflection, the frequency would fluctuate chaotically as the object rotated. It didn't. The line was too stable. If it were an instrument error, the phase drift between observatories wouldn't align. It did. Loeb published a short follow-up on his blog, Hydrogen Line Emissions Coincident with 3I Atlas Trajectory, Preliminary. In it, he outlined what he called the 3 coincidences rule. 1. The same sky coordinates as the 1977 WOW signal. 2. The same frequency within experimental error. 3. The same duration pattern, bursts lasting roughly 72 seconds. He wrote, Three coincidences are a pattern. That line became a rallying cry online. Three coincidences was trending by the end of the week. But while Loeb was gaining followers, others were getting nervous. The European Space Agency quietly restricted public access to telemetry data from Mars Express and ExoMars, both of which had been monitoring 3I Atlas from Mars orbit. The reason given was instrument recalibration. Yet leaked screenshots from a French research Slack channel told a different story. An astrophysicist named Marion Dubois posted that her instrument feed had been scrubbed after it showed unidentified narrowband spikes in the hydrogen band. Minutes later, her access credentials were revoked. The message was deleted. But the internet never forgets. Copies of the post spread across Reddit and Discord servers like wildfire. Users began comparing timestamps of her observation with public data from ground-based observatories. The alignment was perfect. The spikes occurred exactly when 3I Atlas was passing behind the Sun, when, in theory, no Earth-based telescope should have been able to see it at all. So how was a Mars orbiter picking up hydrogen-line bursts from an object on the far side of the Sun? That's when the term the relay hypothesis started circulating. The relay hypothesis suggests that 3I Atlas isn't the transmitter, it's the mirror, a passive repeater, redirecting an ancient broadcast toward us. In other words, the wow signal wasn't a one-time event. It was the first bounce. And the message has been echoing through the solar system ever since, repeating every time a suitable reflector, a planet, a comet, or a passing interstellar object, drifts into position. Sounds crazy, right? Until you realize it explains the timing. Every 72 seconds, the signal peaks. 72, the exact duration of the wow signal, the average interval between the new bursts detected now, and coincidentally, the same number of hours NASA waited before announcing the 1977 signal to the public. Pattern or coincidence? At some point, those two words stop meaning different things. By late October, Loeb's lab at Harvard had become a 24-hour monitoring hub. Students, postdocs, even amateur radio enthusiasts joined in, feeding live data from their small dishes into a shared repository. They called it the Atlas Watch. The goal was simple: triangulate the source before 3I Atlas emerged from behind the Sun. But then something unexpected happened. At 2:37 a.m. Eastern Time, October 20th, the Atlas Watch network detected a faint modulation within the hydrogen signal. A pulse. 4 bursts separated by equal intervals. Each burst contained a subtle frequency shift. A tiny Morse-like rhythm, not random, not noise. When decoded into binary, the pattern translated to 3 repeating values: 1, 1, 3. The internet exploded with theories. Some said it represented a date, November 13th, the day 3I Atlas is predicted to reappear from behind the Sun. Others said it stood for the atomic numbers of hydrogen, and lithium, the 3 simplest elements in the periodic table. Loeb, when asked about it, simply said, "If it's real, we're being given an appointment." Meanwhile, mainstream institutions scrambled to regain control of the narrative. The SETI Institute issued a press release claiming the so-called modulation could result from interference caused by Starlink satellites. But their own public database showed no Starlink passes near the observation windows. NASA repeated the "no evidence of artificial origin" line. ESA stayed silent. The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs called for data transparency, the diplomatic version of "we have no idea what's going on." In chat rooms, users began to quote Avi Loeb's earlier words, "The universe doesn't hide, people do." They weren't joking anymore. As of tonight, the Atlas Watch network has logged 74 hydrogen line bursts from the direction of 3I Atlas, each one precise, each one lasting roughly 72 seconds. When plotted together, they form an unmistakable rhythm, like the beating of a distant heart. And that's what terrifies scientists the most. Because hydrogen doesn't beat. It hums, it glows, it resonates, but it doesn't pulse with intention. Something is modulating it. Something vast, ancient, and for the first time in nearly half a century, awake. If you've been following this story, you know what comes next. We're less than 3 weeks away from 3I Atlas emerging from behind the Sun, When it does, the hydrogen frequency will either fall silent or get louder. Either way, we'll know. And maybe, just maybe, the word wow won't be enough this time. Chapter 4. The Leak from Inside SETI. October 21st, 2025. At exactly 9:43 p.m., a post appeared on an encrypted forum used by professional astronomers. The username was simple: Kepler downlink. The title: They told us not to analyze it. Within 20 minutes, it was gone. Deleted. But not before screenshots spread like wildfire. The post claimed to come from a systems engineer working for the SETI Institute's Allen Telescope Array in California, the very array designed to scan the hydrogen line 24 hours a day. According to the message, a non-terrestrial narrowband source had been detected 3 nights in a row, matching the same right ascension as 3I Atlas. The signal was not noise, it was deliberate, and SETI was told to ignore it. If you think that sounds like conspiracy talk, so did most of us, until someone verified the metadata. The IP address traced back to a subnet owned by the actual Allen Telescope Array. The writing style matched internal documentation templates used by the engineering team, and the time of posting corresponded perfectly to a known data blackout on the public feed. In short, it wasn't some random internet troll. Whoever Kepler downlink was, they worked inside. Their message was short, clinical, and terrifying. Signal locked for 71.8 seconds. Source moving at 23 km/s radial velocity, consistent with Atlas trajectory. Command received to scrub logs and mark as interference. I archived a copy offline. If I disappear, find folder Echo 77. That was it. Within hours, every conspiracy channel on the internet was screaming about Echo 77. Reddit, X, even mainstream outlets picked it up. Echo became shorthand for the thing they're hiding. But the real shock came when a journalist from The Guardian, James Whitaker, claimed to have received the file. He didn't say how, he just posted a single spectrogram. At first glance, it looked like static, a narrow band centered at 1420.45 MHz, identical to the WOW signal. But buried in the pattern was something subtle, almost poetic, a modulation curve repeating at 1/100th of a hertz, exactly every 100 seconds. When converted to audio and sped up, it sounded like breathing. People described it as rhythmic, organic. Some heard a mechanical hum, others swore it was a heartbeat. But here's the detail that made scientists lose sleep. When the spectrogram was run through a Fourier transform, it produced harmonic overtones that aligned with prime numbers. Not 2, not 3. The sequence started at 5, 7, 11, 13. No natural astrophysical process produces harmonic peaks at prime number intervals. None. If the file was authentic, and early analysis suggested it was, this wasn't a reflection or a pulsar or a glitch. It was a message. SETI refused to confirm or deny the leak. Their official statement read, "No verifiable evidence of artificial origin has been confirmed at this time." A sentence that meant nothing and everything. But inside the Institute, things were unraveling. An anonymous staffer emailed Science Alert saying that multiple researchers had been ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements retroactive to October 15th, 5 days before Avi Loeb's post. Another said the internal Slack channels had gone read-only. A third claimed the servers were being mirrored to a federal partner. And then the whistleblower surfaced. 3 days later, a Zoom call leaked online. A 22-minute video posted to a private Discord server before being taken down. In it, a woman in her 30s, face blurred, voice digitally altered, read from what appeared to be a SETI internal memo. Do not engage with outside queries regarding Project Echo. Refer all communications to HQ. Data integrity concerns are being evaluated. Any attempt to replicate the analysis will result in immediate suspension of access. Her tone cracked midway through. You could hear the fear. She went on to describe the night of October 17th, when the array's system flagged a signal of unusual coherence, a narrowband spike near 1420.45 MHz, lasting 71 seconds. It originated from a point just 2 degrees off 3I Atlas's projected location. Normally, that would trigger an automatic verification protocol, a cross-check with other observatories. Instead, the team was told to stop. "We were told the frequency was under federal review," she said. "Someone from NASA comms came into the room. They didn't introduce themselves. They just said, 'Shut it down.'" She hesitated, then added, "It wasn't a request." The video ended there, but not before she left one last line. "The signal repeated twice more after we were ordered to ignore it." That single sentence ignited a global storm. Overnight, hashtags like Echo77, SETI shutdown, and What Are They Hiding trended across every platform. Protesters gathered outside SETI headquarters in Mountain View, holding signs that read, "Science doesn't delete data," and "Let the universe speak." Avi Loeb, ever the provocateur, tweeted simply, "If they're scared to analyze it, maybe they already know what it is." By morning, the tweet had over 5 million views. Then came the denial, sharp, rehearsed, and unconvincing. The SETI Institute's director, Dr. Miguel Andrade, appeared on CNN, insisting the recordings were fabrications generated by malicious actors. He said no signal matching the WOW profile had been confirmed. When pressed about the missing data logs, he smiled and said, "We're scientists, not archivists." The internet tore him apart. Within hours, amateur sleuths noticed that Andrade's press conference background, supposedly inside SETI's command room, was actually a green screen composite of an old stock photo. The building behind him had been locked down since the night before. By evening, SETI's main website redirected to a blank page, "Maintenance in Progress." That night, Avi Loeb published another blog entry titled, "The Confession Under Pressure." It read like both an accusation and a prophecy. He wrote, "In the history of science, silence has never disproven evidence. If the signal is real, we have already heard from the cosmos twice, in 1977 and now. The only question left is whether humanity will dare to listen a third time." The next morning, Kepler Downlink's account vanished completely. No trace, no digital footprint, nothing. But the folder name they mentioned, Echo77, began appearing on dark web data exchanges labeled Confirmed SETI Files, 4.3 GB encrypted. No one knows what's inside. Some say it's just noise, others claim it's the unfiltered hydrogen line dataset. But one detail keeps surfacing. The encryption key is rumored to be a date, 11/13/25. The same date encoded in the mysterious 113 modulation pattern. Coincidence? Maybe. But by now, even the skeptics are whispering, because if 3i Atlas is truly the source of the WOW signal, then the next message isn't 48 years away. It's 23 days. October 22nd, 2025. In the quiet halls of Harvard's astronomy department, Avi Loeb stands before a blackboard filled with overlapping ellipses and strings of numbers. At the top, written in bold chalk, are 3 words: the timeline paradox. He's been awake for 30 hours. Coffee cups, half-finished notes, a map of the Milky Way with a line drawn straight through Sagittarius, the same direction the WOW signal came from in 1977. And on that same trajectory, traced backward through time, sits the path of 3i Atlas. When a reporter from Nature asked him the obvious question, how could a signal arrive 48 years before the object that sent it? Loeb smiled the way only someone standing on the edge of a scientific cliff can. "You're assuming time moves one way," he said. "But what if information doesn't?" To understand his point, you have to think the way a physicist does, not in years or distances, but in light cones. Every event in the universe radiates information at the speed of light. Those ripples define what can affect what and when. But there's a loophole buried deep in quantum mechanics, a loophole Einstein himself hated, retrocausality. It's the idea that certain quantum interactions don't care about direction. They can send correlations backward in time as easily as forward. In other words, effect can precede cause, if the cause hasn't happened yet from our point of view. Loeb calls this the mirror of the vacuum. When a particle interacts with the vacuum field, half the wave function travels forward, half backward. We usually ignore the backward half because we can't observe it. But what if something, or someone, learned to amplify that half? What if 3i Atlas isn't just traveling through space, but through space-time itself, leaving an informational wake that can echo both ways? It sounds insane until you realize nature already does this. In 2018, physicists at the University of Vienna performed what's called a delayed choice quantum eraser experiment. They proved that a photon's behavior, whether it acts like a wave or a particle, can be determined by a measurement made after it's already hit the detector. The future influencing the past. Information flowing backward. Loeb's theory takes that idea to a cosmic scale. He suggests that the wow signal wasn't a message transmitted in 1977. It was a future echo, a premonition of the moment when 3i Atlas would enter the inner solar system in 2025. The signal didn't come from the object. It came from its timeline. In his newest paper draft, leaked 2 nights ago, Loeb writes, "If an interstellar artifact carries a high Q resonant structure capable of coupling to the hydrogen hyperfine line, it may produce a retrotemporal interference pattern detectable decades before physical proximity." Translated, the object could have caused the signal before it arrived. To test it, Loeb's team modeled how such an artifact might interact with background hydrogen radiation as it crosses relativistic boundaries, the thin quantum skin where interstellar plasma meets the heliopause. The simulation showed something astonishing: a predictive burst at precisely 1420 MHz, emitted as the object entered the heliospheric bow shock. The burst would propagate both forward and backward in time, fading symmetrically around a point that, from our perspective, happens to be 1977. That's not science fiction. That's physics, written in the cold language of equations. Of course, not everyone buys it. Dr. Maria Chen at Caltech called the idea clever nonsense. She told The Atlantic, "Retrocausality is a mathematical artifact. It doesn't transmit usable information. Loeb is treating quantum noise like prophecy." Others are less dismissive. Dr. David Grush at MIT noted that the correlation between the wow signal and 3i Atlas trajectory is real and statistically non-trivial, adding, "If not retrocausality, then what?" That's the problem. Nobody has a better answer. Even SETI's own internal review, leaked last night, admits that current astrophysical models cannot explain the temporal alignment. But Loeb isn't content with theory. He wants proof. He's coordinating an experiment he calls Project Paradox. 6 radio telescopes across 3 continents, from the Atacama Desert to the Owens Valley Array, will simultaneously record hydrogen line data every night until November 13th, the day 3i Atlas reappears from behind the sun. If his theory is correct, the signal will begin to strengthen before the object becomes visible again. An anticipatory burst, as though reality itself were preparing for contact. That would mean information is already leaking from the future. And maybe it already is. A group of physicists in Italy compared historical radio data from the 1970s and found a faint precursor to the wow signal, a smaller, weaker pulse that occurred exactly 48 years after it. The timestamp? August 15, 2025. 2 months ago. The mirror image of the original. They called it the echo symmetry. If the pattern holds, it suggests the signal isn't a single event, but a standing wave stretched across time, oscillating between 1977 and 2025 like the 2 ends of a cosmic guitar string. Loeb put it more dramatically. Maybe we've been listening to the same note for nearly half a century, and only now realize we're part of the song. The implications are staggering. If time-symmetric communication is real, it changes everything. Not just physics, but philosophy. It means the universe might already contain every message ever sent or received. We just experience them out of order. It means the wow signal wasn't a call from out there. It was a handshake across time. And if 3i Atlas is the messenger, then its arrival isn't the beginning of contact. It's the middle. The first word was written in 1977. The reply comes in 2025. The conversation may have been happening all along. But here's where Loeb's idea turns from beautiful to terrifying. If information can flow backward, then so can warning. And in his paper's final paragraph, one most people ignored, he writes, "The apparent 99% probability of correlation suggests intent. If the signal precedes the cause, the sender may already know the outcome. In other words, whoever or whatever sent the WOW signal might have known exactly what would happen when 3i Atlas reached us. And they sent the message first. When asked if he was afraid, Loeb laughed softly. "Fear is just information arriving early," he said. Then he turned back to the board and circled the date November 13th, 2025. That's 22 days from now. If he's right, the next signal won't come from the past. It'll come from the future. And this time, it might answer the question we never realized we asked. Chapter 6. The Day the Sky Whispered. October 23rd, 2025. It began just after 2 a.m. Universal Time. No press release, no announcement, just data, the kind that doesn't lie and doesn't care whether you're ready for it. At the Very Large Array in New Mexico, the night crew was running routine calibrations. The sky was clear, the Milky Way glowing like spilled silver. Then, at 2:07, every dish froze mid-sweep. The spectrum analyzer screamed. A narrow spike at 1420.45 megahertz, pure, sharp, steady, cutting through the static like a blade. Duration, 72 seconds. It was the same signature as the WOW signal, the same shape, same decay curve, same amplitude modulation. Only this time there was one difference. It repeated. 2 minutes later, Japan's Yasuda Deep Space Center confirmed the same signal, same direction, just above the solar limb, the exact point where 3i Atlas would soon emerge. Then the Effelsberg telescope in Germany reported a secondary burst, phase shifted by 7 seconds. In Australia, the Parkes Observatory logged a third burst at identical frequency. 4 observatories, 4 continents, 1 impossible harmony. Within 20 minutes, the entire global radio network was alive with chatter, screens lighting up with the same rhythmic pattern. 72 seconds on, 2 minutes of silence, 72 seconds again. The world had heard the whisper. At first, people thought it was interference. Starlink, radar, a coordinated hoax. But the Doppler drift told another story. The signal was coming from deep space, moving exactly as 3i Atlas should, its velocity increasing as it swung behind the sun's gravity well. And the timing matched the predicted echo window from Loeb's Project Paradox experiment down to the minute. At 3:01 a.m., Loeb himself was on live stream. He hadn't slept in 3 days. Behind him, the control room at Harvard was chaos. Monitors filled with spectral graphs, grad students shouting coordinates. He leaned into the mic and said only 5 words. It's the same voice again. Across the world, phones buzzed, networks surged, and for a brief moment, humanity looked up together. Not at the news, not at each other, but at the sky. In Times Square, billboards froze as live data streams replaced advertisements. In Tokyo, people stopped on pedestrian bridges to listen to the faint, translated hum. An artificial tone slowed down 8,000 times so humans could hear it. It wasn't music, but it felt like it. A pulsing, breath-like rhythm, rising and falling as if the universe were exhaling through a narrow flute. Some described it as a heartbeat. Others called it a countdown. By dawn, governments were scrambling. The White House science advisor issued a brief statement. "We are in communication with our international partners to analyze anomalous radio events. No evidence of extraterrestrial origin has been confirmed." It was the same sentence NASA had used 48 years earlier. But this time, the words didn't calm anyone. They sounded like fear. Because this time, there were witnesses. Social media filled with videos, backyard radio dishes lighting up, amateur astronomers pointing their rigs at Sagittarius and picking up faint echoes. One user in Finland posted an audio clip where the signal modulated slightly near the end. A dip, a pause, and then a pattern of short pulses. When visualized, the pulses formed a perfect curve, a sine wave folded into itself. When inverted, it spelled a sequence of numbers: 1420, 1977, 2025. The coordinates of a conversation. Within hours, the clip had 50 million views. SETI refused to comment. Meanwhile, chaos unfolded inside observatories. At the European Southern Observatory in Chile, staff reported an unexplained network outage that cut data feeds for 10 minutes, the exact duration of one signal cycle. When the feed returned, half the data files were corrupted. At Arecibo's ruins in Puerto Rico, where the original WOW signal was once detected through a sister network, a tourist live-streamed the moment his radio scanner picked up the hydrogen tone. The ruins, a ghost of human listening, caught the universe whispering again. He said the sound made the ground vibrate. In London, the BBC interrupted regular programming. Anchor voice trembling. "We are receiving reports that multiple radio telescopes across the world have detected what appears to be a structured signal from deep space. The signal bears a striking resemblance to the so-called WOW signal of 1977. It was the moment the story became real. Markets froze. Power grids flickered as thousands of amateur stations overloaded the spectrum. In New York, crowds gathered in Central Park, watching the sky as though expecting words to appear among the stars. And in that collective silence, something else happened. At 4:19 a.m. UTC, a second, fainter tone overlapped the main hydrogen line. Higher frequency, shorter duration. It wasn't random. It was harmonic. For 72 seconds, the universe sang in two voices. Back in Cambridge, Avi Loeb was still on live stream when the overlap appeared. He stared at the waveform on the monitor, his eyes reflecting the green trace as it began to beat in perfect sync. "Two frequencies," someone whispered off camera. Loeb nodded slowly. "Call and response." He didn't mean human and alien. He meant past and future. The room went silent. Within an hour, the signal faded. No more bursts, no repeats, just static and the low hum of human disbelief. But the damage, or the miracle, was done. Every observatory had recorded it. Every scientist had witnessed it. There would be no data scrub, no plausible denial. The WOW signal had spoken again, 48 years later to the minute. At 8 a.m., Loeb issued a single sentence on his blog. "The conversation is real." The post received 10 million views in an hour before the site crashed. Around the world, news anchors tried to sound calm. Politicians called for restraint. Religious leaders called it prophecy. But for once, no one seemed to own the story. It belonged to the sky. By nightfall, something even stranger began to happen. Dozens of amateur radio operators reported faint hydrogen band aftershocks, echoes that seemed to ripple across the ionosphere, fading in and out like reflections bouncing between Earth and something far beyond. Each echo arrived exactly 72 seconds apart. They weren't strong enough to be natural reflections. They behaved like coordinated returns, as if the signal were scanning us, mapping our responses, learning. A user on a physics forum posted, "It's like it's breathing with us." The next morning, Loeb met reporters outside Harvard. Cameras flashing, questions flying. He didn't say much. He just looked up at the pale morning sky, the sun barely rising over the horizon, and whispered, "It's not coming. It's already here." And with that, the story shifted again, from speculation to revelation, because now humanity had proof that the silence between 1977 and 2025 wasn't absence. It was anticipation. The universe hadn't been quiet. It had been waiting for the right moment to exhale. And on October 23rd, 2025, the sky finally whispered back. Chapter 7. The World Reacts. October 24th, 2025. The day after the sky whispered, Earth didn't wake up the same. When the signal faded, the silence that followed felt heavier than sound. It wasn't relief. It was awareness. Every government, every scientist, every person with a radio knew the unthinkable had just happened. The WOW signal had returned. By dawn, news networks went into emergency mode. CNN's banner read, "Global Response to Deep Space Signal." BBC called it "The Second Contact." Fox went with "The Hydrogen Hoax." 3 headlines, 3 worlds. Across continents, politicians tried to control the story, but it was already too big. The United Nations convened an emergency session. The European Union suspended stock trading for 48 hours. China locked down all civilian radio observatories and classified their hydrogen data as national security assets. In Washington, The president addressed the nation. We are working closely with our international partners to understand the nature of the signal. There is no reason to believe Earth faces any threat. Her tone was steady, but her hands trembled as she turned the page. The public didn't buy it. By noon, millions of people were watching live streams of Loeb's lab, treating it like a cosmic command center. In chat feeds, words like message, arrival, and revelation filled the screen. One user wrote, "If they're saying don't panic, it's already too late." Supermarkets in Los Angeles reported sudden shortages of water and batteries. Crypto markets crashed, then spiked again as people started trading Atlas coin, a meme currency tied to belief in the signal's authenticity. Churches opened their doors overnight, some filled with prayer, others with fear. At the Vatican, an emergency council met in silence. Hours later, the Pope delivered a message from the balcony of St. Peter's Square, broadcast live to the world. If there are others who think, who feel, who send their voice across the stars, they too are part of creation. Let us not fear the chorus of the universe. The crowd erupted in applause. But in the shadows of the same square, a different crowd chanted, "Stop the lies," because for every believer, there was a skeptic, or worse, a denier. In Texas, radio preachers called the signal a deception. Satan comes not as darkness, one said, but as light and numbers. In Berlin, protesters demanded scientific transparency, accusing governments of hiding the full recording. In Tokyo, thousands gathered outside the National Observatory, chanting, "Let the data speak." And in Tel Aviv, something unprecedented happened. Rabbis, imams, and priests held a joint vigil, staring at the night sky in silence. For a brief moment, the world was united, not in understanding, but in awe. Then came the deepfakes. Videos flooded the internet claiming to show decoded transmissions. Glowing glyphs, alien voices, even synthetic images of a colossal object near the sun. Most were fake, but a few were convincing enough to fool millions. One clip, viewed 80 million times in 12 hours, claimed to show Morse code embedded in the wow signal harmonics. When slowed down, it spelled a single word, begin. SETI called it nonsense. Loeb refused to comment. The line between evidence and hysteria vanished overnight. Meanwhile, inside Harvard's astrophysics department, Loeb's team was imploding under the weight of fame. Their live stream had surpassed 10 million viewers. Reporters camped outside their offices. Every student who'd ever taken Loeb's class was suddenly treated like a prophet. But the man himself looked exhausted. When the New York Times asked if he believed the signal was proof of intelligent origin, he paused. "Belief isn't science," he said. "But science doesn't erase the feeling you get when the universe speaks twice in your lifetime." Then he smiled, that weary, dangerous smile of a man who knows too much, and added, "We're not the audience. We're the echo." By evening, a coordinated cyber attack hit 3 major observatories, the Very Large Array, Parkes, and Effelsberg, simultaneously. Data feeds were corrupted, backup drives wiped. Anonymous accounts claimed the attacks came from a coalition of insiders trying to protect the data from government interference. The group called itself Echo Defense. Their message read, "The data belongs to humanity. If they hide it, we'll release it." The next day, someone did. A torrent file appeared on multiple servers labeled Atlas Raw, H-line 10/23/25. Within hours, thousands of people had downloaded it. But when users tried to open the file, they found only noise, static layered with bursts of what sounded like human breathing. Or maybe that was just the room echoing back. By the second night, strange coincidences began piling up. Global magnetometer networks reported minute fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field, oscillating every 72 seconds, perfectly matching the signal's duration. Pilots over the Atlantic reported brief radio blackouts, followed by what one described as a pulse that felt like pressure in the skull. Hospitals in several cities reported spikes in patients experiencing vivid dreams involving light and sound. One woman in Buenos Aires told reporters she heard the signal in her head before collapsing. Doctors found nothing wrong with her hearing. It was as if the universe had shifted a fraction of a note, and human consciousness was struggling to tune itself. And in the middle of it all stood Avi Loeb, now both hero and heretic. Some called him the Galileo of the 21st century. Others called him a fraud who unleashed hysteria. When asked what he thought about being at the center of the storm, he answered quietly, "This was never about me. It's about whether we can still tell the difference between discovery and faith." Reporters asked if he thought 3i Atlas was intelligent. He shook his head. "Intelligence is a word we invented for the mirror. Maybe we're just seeing our reflection from the future." By the third day, governments began censoring amateur broadcasts of the hydrogen frequency. Licenses were revoked. Feeds were cut. For public safety, they said. But by then, millions had already built backyard receivers. The signal had gone viral. You can't censor the sky. In one of his last public appearances before going silent, Loeb was asked what humanity should do if the signal returned. He looked straight into the camera and said, "Listen, don't reply. Not yet." Then he left the room. That night, at exactly midnight UTC, several private radio dishes picked up a faint burst on 1420 MHz. Duration, 72 seconds. Signal-to-noise ratio, low but clear. It ended with a short, sharp blip, a new pattern, 3 pulses, pause, 3 more. Morse code for the letter S. No one knew what it meant. Some said second message. Others said stop. But the people who had been listening longest, the ones who remembered the old paper printout from Ohio with that red scrawl across the data, knew exactly what it meant. It meant the conversation wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chapter 8. The Return of 3i Atlas. November 13th, 2025. 48 years after the first wow signal. 21 days after the sky whispered. And now, after 3 weeks of global anticipation, 3i Atlas has finally re-emerged from behind the sun. At 5:17 a.m. UTC, the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, captured the first faint glint of the object's tail refracting sunlight. A thin, cold shimmer, cutting across the black vacuum like a scar. For a moment, astronomers thought it was dust. Then it moved. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory confirmed visual reacquisition at 5:31. The data feed came in clean. Magnitude 16, moving fast, rotation period unknown. But the spectrum didn't match anything on record. Instead of a dusty comet tail or rocky debris, 3i Atlas reflected a near-perfect broadband albedo, like polished metal. "It's brightening exponentially," one technician said over the open feed. "That's not natural." The voice was trembling. By sunrise in Europe, telescopes around the world were tracking it. Amateur astronomers uploaded live images, a small teardrop-shaped object glowing blue-white against the void. It was beautiful. And wrong. Its brightness curve didn't follow any known cometary behavior. It pulsed, every 72 seconds, the same rhythm, the same duration, the same signature as the signal. At Harvard, Avi Loeb watched in silence. He hadn't slept in days. His team had grown from a handful of students to a global network. The Atlas Watch now included over 1,000 observatories, synced through a shared data hub. At exactly 6:04 a.m., the object reached perihelion, its closest point to the sun. Every telescope registered a sudden drop in visible light, followed by a brief flash of radio interference. And then, for the first time in human history, the hydrogen line at 1420 MHz began to pulse in perfect synchronization with a visible object in space. It wasn't theory anymore. It was happening. The signal grew stronger, sharper, amplitude rising, background noise vanishing. Within seconds, the waveform stabilized into a repeating envelope. A rise, a fall, then a short harmonic burst at twice the base frequency. Avi Loeb leaned toward the screen and whispered, "It's modulating itself." At 7:12 a.m., a second frequency joined, 1420.46, the same offset recorded in October. 2 lines, alternating, like a call and response. Across the world, radio observatories fell into perfect phase lock. Every 72 seconds, the same pattern echoed across hemispheres. The universe had found its voice again, and this time it was talking to something we could see. Governments went silent. The United Nations closed session. The Vatican called for spiritual reflection. The Chinese state network cut to a looping message, signal under analysis. In London, BBC anchors tried not to cry on air. In Los Angeles, traffic stopped as people streamed live feeds from observatories onto digital billboards. Everywhere, humanity looked up, not in fear, but in wonder. Because for the first time, we weren't listening to the past. We were watching the future speak. At 7:38, the hydrogen signal changed. The amplitude flattened. The modulation rate slowed from 72 seconds to 60, then 50, then 36, each drop halving the interval, as though the object were adjusting, tuning itself. At 36 seconds, the pulse split into 3 bursts, 3 identical spikes, 3 seconds apart, and on every scope, the same word appeared in the live data overlay, a checksum, auto-generated by the signal analysis software. S, 3 pulses, 3 S's. When translated into binary Morse, it read as a single word, SOS. No one knew what to make of it. Was it asking for help? Was it sending a warning? Or was it echoing something we once sent? A cry lost in the dark, finally returned. At 8:01, the pulse stopped. Silence. Then, for 5 full minutes, nothing. Every telescope held its breath. Even the noise floor of the receivers seemed to go still. Then, without warning, a burst of radio energy slammed through every sensor simultaneously. Broadband, blinding, saturating instruments from Chile to Japan. The data stream went white. When it cleared, a single line of telemetry remained. 4 numbers, 19, 77, 20, 25, 71. The year again, and the number of seconds, the same 71.8 second duration of both signals. Back in Cambridge, Loeb stared at the screen, pale, motionless. The room was silent except for the hum of the machines. He whispered, "It's closing the loop." A student asked, "What does that mean?" Loeb didn't answer. He just turned to the window, where dawn light was spilling through the blinds, and said softly, "The signal was never a message from them. It was an arrival notice from us." At that exact moment, the Deep Space Network reported a faint object detaching from 3I Atlas's tail. Small, geometric, reflective. Trajectory, earthbound. Size, 30 meters. Velocity, constant, no spin. ETA, 22 days. And then, silence again. No more pulses. No more hydrogen whispers. Just a growing speck of light on every telescope, moving quietly, deliberately, toward the planet that had finally answered back. On social media, a phrase began trending across every language. We heard them. Now they're coming. But in a quiet corner of his lab, Avi Loeb typed one final entry into his research log before locking the file. Contact is not a conversation. It's a mirror. When we listen long enough, the reflection starts to move. The world went to sleep that night staring at a point of light near the sun. Small, perfect, silent. By morning, it would be brighter, and the waiting would begin again. Chapter 9. The Object Approaches. Day 1, November 14th, 2025. At 03:12 a.m. UTC, the Deep Space Network confirmed what everyone had already guessed. The smaller object detached from 3I Atlas wasn't debris. It was moving with intent. A clean trajectory, no tumbling, constant acceleration of 0.03 g, gentle enough for a controlled descent, impossible for a rock. Its course intersected one point. Earth. Projected arrival, December 5th. 22 days. Within hours, governments switched from curiosity to crisis. The United Nations convened behind closed doors. NASA, ESA, and Roscosmos activated their planetary defense protocols, not to intercept, but to observe. There were no press releases, only leaks. A classified memo from NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office read, "Object Echo 1 exhibits non-ballistic motion consistent with powered flight. Recommend full data blackout until trajectory confirmed." The leak spread before sunrise. By the time officials confirmed the object's existence, half the planet was already watching its telemetry live on amateur astronomy feeds. You could track it yourself, a single bright point rising from the solar glare, gliding toward the orbit of Earth like a needle through fabric. Day 2, November 15th. Harvard's Atlas Watch network was now operating around the clock. Loeb had gone from scientist to reluctant spokesperson, his every word dissected by millions. Reporters asked the same question: is it alien? He kept giving the same answer: it's interstellar, that's all we know. But what he didn't say was written all over his face. Day 3, November 16th. A new modulation appeared in the hydrogen line, a repeating triplet, 72 seconds on, then silence. The pattern matched the pulse rate from 3I Atlas's perihelion, but weaker, more erratic. Some thought it was an automated beacon, telemetry. Others thought it was language. A computer linguist at MIT ran the pulses through a phonetic pattern recognition model. The output looked like syllables. When mapped to Morse, it read a single word: wait. The world didn't wait. In Washington, the president authorized Project Sentinel, an international coalition to coordinate observation and response. Ariane rockets in French Guiana launched 2 satellites into high orbit. Their mission: to triangulate the signal's exact origin. At the same time, Elon Musk tweeted, "If someone's coming, we should at least say hi." NASA replied within the hour, "Do not transmit." Day 4, November 17th. Religious leaders called for restraint. Markets crashed, then rebounded on rumors of quantum communication technology. Conspiracy groups declared December 5th the return day. Loeb gave one interview to the BBC. "This isn't invasion," he said. "It's geometry. They're following the same line we sent a signal along 48 years ago. Maybe they're just closing the circuit." The interviewer asked, "And if it's not geometry?" Loeb looked straight at the camera. "Then it's destiny." Day 7, November 20th. The object was now inside the orbit of Venus. Every telescope on Earth could see it. Amateur astronomers described it as a glowing pearl wrapped in mist. Spectral analysis showed an impossible composition: pure reflective surface, temperature constant despite solar exposure. No heat signature, no outgassing. The object wasn't absorbing light, it was redirecting it. Day 9, November 22nd. A new signal appeared, weaker but distinct. 4 pulses, then a pause. 4 more, then a longer pause. The binary translation: 4, 8, 48. The same number of years between the original WOW signal and now. Loeb stared at the printout for a long time before saying, "They're marking time." Day 10, November 23rd. Protests erupted outside the White House. Some demanded disclosure, others demanded prayer. A group of students at MIT projected a giant message onto the side of their physics building: "Don't answer." Online, a counter-movement began. Project Voice. They believed silence was cowardice. They built their own transmitter, crowdfunded in 24 hours, tuned precisely to 1420 megahertz. Their message was one word: hello. The broadcast lasted 72 seconds. Day 11, November 24th. 6 hours after the amateur transmission, the hydrogen line went dark. No pulses, no hum, nothing. The universe held its breath. For the first time in a month, there was no signal from 3I Atlas or the approaching object. The silence felt like judgment. Day 13, November 26th. At 0241 UTC, a burst returned, not from the sun's direction, but from deep interplanetary space, halfway between Venus and Earth. Amplitude, massive. Duration, 72 seconds. Waveform, perfect symmetry. When slowed to audio, it sounded like a whisper saying the word "wait." The same message, only louder. In Geneva, the United Nations Space Committee released a cautious statement: "No attempt will be made to transmit until the object's intentions are clear." But it was already too late. The world had already replied. Day 15, November 28th. The object entered Earth's orbit path. Trajectory confirmed. Intercept. At Harvard, Loeb's team detected something new: microbursts in the radio spectrum, spaced exactly 72 seconds apart, descending in frequency like a countdown. Loeb whispered, "It's syncing with Earth's rotation." At the same time, satellites across geostationary orbit began experiencing brief blackouts. GPS clocks slipped by precisely 72 seconds, then corrected themselves. Day 17, November 30th. The first visual image emerged. The James Webb Space Telescope, using near-infrared, captured a shape unlike anything human-made. A hollow shell, 30 meters wide, smooth and faceted, like a perfect dodecahedron. Its surface shimmered with hydrogen line reflections, as though it were transmitting light itself. In the center, a faint blue pulse beat once every 72 seconds. By now, the public had split into tribes. Some prayed, some celebrated, some hid underground. But for the scientists still listening, one truth remained. The signal wasn't random. It was rhythm, and rhythm means intention. Day 19, December 2nd. The hydrogen frequency began to rise, shifting upward. 1420.45, 1420.5, 1420.7. Each step coincided with a burst of visible light from the object's surface. Across the world, radio receivers picked up a pattern of clicks, almost like speech. When converted to binary and analyzed, the waveform formed a spiral, the same shape as the Milky Way. At its center, a dot, coordinates matching the solar system. At its edge, a faint arrow pointing back at Earth. Day 20, December 4th. The object entered Earth's magnetosphere. Satellites glitched, power grids flickered. In northern skies, auroras appeared at tropical latitudes, green and violet curtains rippling under a silent electric wind. Then, at 11:11 UTC, all radio channels went silent for exactly 72 seconds. Then came the sound. It was a low tone, deep, resonant, unearthly, sweeping across every receiver simultaneously. No words, no modulation, just a single, perfect note. When analyzed, the tone carried embedded harmonics forming a pattern, the same one printed on the original WOW signal paper from 1977. The circle, the arrow, the coordinates of Sagittarius, and next to them, a new symbol, the logical sign for therefore. Avi Loeb read the output and whispered, "They're answering the question we never asked." A student asked, "What's the question?" He smiled faintly. "If we exist alone." As night fell, the object stabilized in high Earth orbit, silent, gleaming 30 meters across, spinning slowly over the Pacific. Its radio output dropped to 0. Its lights dimmed. The world waited. And at exactly midnight UTC, for 72 seconds, the hydrogen line flickered one last time. A sequence of 7 short pulses. Binary translation, "See you." Then nothing. The next day, astronomers confirmed the object was still there, but cold, inert, as if it had gone to sleep. Avi Loeb looked up at the night sky and said softly to no one, "The universe spoke. Now it's our turn." Chapter 10. The Message. Decoded, December 12th, 2025. 8 days after the object went silent, the world is still holding its breath. No new pulses, no whispers on the hydrogen line, just the steady reflection of sunlight off a silent shape orbiting above the Pacific Ocean, 30 meters wide, perfectly still, as if watching. Governments call it the Atlas Anomaly. The internet calls it Echo 1. To Avi Loeb, it's something else entirely. He calls it the answer. In a small lab at Harvard, far from the press conferences and security briefings, Loeb and his team replay the final 72-second signal again and again. They've been decoding it for a week, breaking it into harmonic layers, filtering background noise, analyzing amplitude drift. And what they found isn't random. It's structure. Every 16 seconds, a subtle modulation appears, a frequency shift equivalent to a 1.7 Hz variation, repeating across the entire signal. When mapped as time versus amplitude, it forms a perfect logarithmic spiral, a fingerprint of mathematics. When converted into base 12 notation, The spiral ratios match the hydrogen fine structure constant to 8 decimal places. That's not nature, that's design. On the night of December 10th, one of Loeb's students, a linguist named Nina Clark, noticed something no one else did. Each of the 72 seconds wasn't uniform. Buried beneath the main tone was a faint pulsing subcarrier, binary. She isolated it, slowed it down, and ran it through a pattern recognition model trained on mathematical constants. The output was breathtaking. A string of numbers, prime sequences, grouped in clusters of 5. When plotted on a two-dimensional grid, the primes formed a shape, a helix within a circle. DNA. The message wasn't words, it was geometry. Loeb wrote in his log, "The universe doesn't speak in languages. It speaks in ratios. Whoever built this understands biology." The pattern repeated twice, then paused, then repeated inverted, mirror symmetry. One version clockwise, one counterclockwise. 2 helices, 2 directions, 2 sides of the same molecule. When combined, the sequences produced 20 pairs of data clusters, the same number as the amino acids in terrestrial life. The probability of coincidence? Less than 1 in 10 to the 21st power. Someone, or something, had sent a biological map. The team called it the Genesis Code, and buried inside that code, at the 21st second of the signal, sat a strange anomaly. A small gap, 1 bit missing, like a deliberate pause. When Nina filled it with a parity correction, the sequence aligned into a coherent checksum, 71.8. 71.8 seconds. The exact length of both the wow signal and the final transmission, as if the sender was signing their work. Meanwhile, across the world, chaos was turning to order. Markets stabilized. Governments opened partial archives. The United Nations announced the creation of the Global Listening Network, a consortium dedicated to non-invasive observation of the Atlas object. And for the first time since October, the world stopped shouting and started listening again. People began to talk, not about fear, but about meaning. Churches projected the waveform on stained glass. Artists painted it across city walls. Children wore T-shirts with the symbol printed beneath the coordinates of Sagittarius. Even skeptics couldn't deny it anymore. Something, intelligent or otherwise, had reached across time to say one thing: you are not alone. But Loeb wasn't satisfied. He believed there was more buried in the data, something hidden beyond the obvious geometry. He spent nights staring at the waveform, slowing it, folding it, transforming it. He knew the message wasn't linear. It couldn't be. Retrocausality. Time symmetry. The signal could contain information from both directions, past and future encoded in the same note. If true, the final 72-second burst wasn't just a transmission. It was a container. On December 12th, Loeb ran the waveform backward. The room went silent. The monitors filled with inverted data, noise, hum, static. Then, out of the chaos, a faint modulation appeared. Binary again. Short, long, short, long. When decoded, it spelled a date, 2033, 8 years from now. He replayed it, same result, same sequence. He asked Nina to verify. She ran a Fourier reconstruction, splitting the signal into forward and reverse harmonics. Both contained timestamps, one for 1977, one for 2025, and one for 2033. 3 anchors. 3 points on a timeline looped together. "It's not a message," Nina whispered. "It's a map of time." Loeb nodded slowly. "And the next coordinate isn't a place. It's a year." He turned to his notebook and wrote 3 numbers side by side, 1977, 2025, 2033. Underneath, he drew a single arrow connecting them both ways. Outside the lab, snow was falling over Cambridge. Reporters camped at the gates, the world waiting for a statement. But Loeb said nothing. He sat alone at his desk, staring at the frozen waveform on the monitor, the signal that had crossed nearly half a century to find its echo. He reached for his pen and wrote the last line of his private journal. "If the signal truly loops through time, then someone, maybe us, already sent it." He paused, then underlined one word: already. At midnight, Loeb opened a hidden directory on his computer labeled Echo 77. Inside were thousands of data files, every pulse, every modulation, every whisper of the hydrogen line since August 15, 1977. At the bottom was one final file. Timestamp, December 12, 2025, 23:59:48. Size, 72 megabytes, unlabeled. He clicked it. The screen went black, then white. A faint tone filled the speakers, low, steady, familiar. And through the static, a voice. Not synthetic, not alien, human. "This is Harvard Station. Signal received. Preparing for retransmission." Then silence. The monitor flickered once more. A single line of text appeared across the screen. "Cycle complete. Begin again." Outside, above the clouds, the Atlas object drifted silently across the stars, its reflective surface catching the light of Earth's dawn. For a brief moment, the world below shimmered in hydrogen blue. And then, the glow faded. Somewhere, in a deep frequency band no one was monitoring anymore, a 72-second pulse began to rise.